Welcome to episode 267 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 17th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. Friends, I hope you consider sending in your voice messages to schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. Your recording will be included in the very next episode. Visit today's show notes for 24 prompts and the instructions for submitting your voice messages to the show. You don't want to miss out on our next book club. Jarred Amato, creator of Project Lit, has a newly released book, Just Read It, Unlocking the Magic of Independent Reading in Middle and High School Classrooms. I will post the discussion questions in the next few weeks on social media and linked in future episode show notes. Listeners are welcome to either send in their voicemail responses or join the podcast in recording our conversation to share in an upcoming episode in May. Check out the link in today's show notes. Amanda Jones's upcoming book, That Librarian, will be available starting on August 27th, but you can order your copy now. And if you use the indie bookseller Cavalier House Books in Amanda's hometown of Denham Springs, Louisiana, you will get a signed copy. I've included a link in the show notes. When you take a look at the cover of Amanda's book, you might recognize the Freedom Fighter shirt she's wearing. She reached out to the designer, Christy, who then designed a line of That Librarian apparel, as well as That Librarian flair, such as a bag, sticker, and mug. I love that we can all be that librarian who advocates for our library and our students' access to books. You will find a link in the online store in our show notes, and please know 15% of the proceeds goes to the Texas Library Association, as that is the home state of the designer. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is at @LMS_United. On Threads, you can find me at School Librarians United, and on Blue Sky at SLU Podcast, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Be sure to listen to episode 224. I announce a sponsorship with Literati Book Fairs. And now is a chance to hear from one of Literati's team members, Jenny. Jenny Powell, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Jenny, I am always excited to meet the members of the Literati team. So for listeners who are tuning in right now, would you give us an idea, what is it that you do for Literati?
Yeah, I am the design lead of our book fair team. So I help find the direction that we're going to do for all of our themes and help produce all of the design materials that we do season after season.
Fantastic. You know, as the creative mind behind so many of the visual elements that go into a Literati book fair, what all goes into bringing those designs to life?
Great question. A whole lot. We start our creative work about a year out from our book fair's launch. We put a lot of thought into the themes that we choose, and this might involve personal research, polls within our company, and then also reaching out to kids to see what themes pique their interest the most. We want to choose something that boys and girls will resonate with, that gets them excited about their fair, and also gets them to want to read. Once we have a theme chosen, our team starts putting together a mood board, gathering reference illustration and typography, and brainstorming how to put our brand stamp on our theme. And we reach out to illustrators we admire who can help bring our brand ethos to life and who are great partners in this project. We work with that illustrator on developing a toolkit of illustrations that we can use to build out all of the assets of our fair. And we make sure that every single piece of marketing materials that we produce for students and librarians and parents is all within that design ethos. Before the announcement of our themes, we also do an exploration of typography to develop the logo for our theme, and that's used on all of our materials. And the fonts that we choose extend out to all the signage that we use and bring everything aesthetically together.
I love that. It is so important that there is a visual component to this because, when you're building up that excitement for the book fair, it's hard because the kids know it's coming, but there's, the book fair is not there yet. So we really do rely on those visuals to be able to put out into our messaging to our families because that's all we've got to go on. We're like, I promise, it's going to be here very soon.
Yeah, of course.
You know what? I appreciate you giving us sort of this behind the scenes because I'm going to tell you right now, I don't have an artistic bone in my body. And I know that there is so much thought and it is so intuitive and the things that you're doing are very intentional. And now I have a better understanding of why it all comes together in the way that it does and how methodical you are in the research that you do to make sure that this is something that appeals to all of our students.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy to go into more detail, too. I love talking about it.
Well, I hope you'll join us next week. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Thank you.
Friends, tune in to learn all about Literati and their very generous offer. Librarians who book their very first Literati Book Fair and mention the code UNITED when booking may qualify to receive a $500 gift card to Titlewave. Visit the link in today's show notes and call the Literati team to see if you qualify. And now a word from our sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I'm so excited to be working with them. I'm also grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 6. They are offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for today's episode, Creating a Reading Culture, and my conversation with Dr. Margaret Merga. So excited. Dr. Merga, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me back, Amy. I'm excited to have another chat with you.
Friends, the last time we spoke was December 2022 when we recorded an episode 206, Supporting Literacy and Wellness. I loved learning about how valuable teacher librarians are in supporting our student community.
Absolutely, and they play such a key role, and that's why we really need to make sure we put the focus on what they do so that we can appreciate and celebrate them and they don't get taken for granted.
Well, and absolutely, from your lips to God's ears, right? So, please introduce yourself because I believe you are in a brand new job now.
I sure am. So my name is Margaret Merga. I'm an associate professor at the University of Notre Dame in Australia. And I've started this role with a really keen drive to hopefully, fingers crossed, get up a bit of a robust international school library workforce research program. So I'm at the absolute infancy of this, but what I think we really need is some high quality international research to inform our advocacy. We've been saying this for a long time now. School library workforce is struggling pretty much everywhere where I've spoken to people. We're seeing, shrinking in our staffing. We're seeing, it getting harder and harder to negotiate for the resourcing budgets that we need to meet the bare minimum. And if we, continue to just allow this, degradation to continue, then we're going to be in a situation in the relatively short term with our greying workforce where we don't have the school library resource, and that's going to have implications for student well-being, student literacy. And, we can't on one hand be banging on about the importance of making students future ready and digitally literate and giving them the information literacy and source credibility skills they need to deal with the modern world, and then cut the staff that we need that provides those really important skills. I mean, when it comes to school library professionals, they're the ones staying on the front foot of evolutions in that space. They're the ones continually upskilling and passionately, putting together learning programs that bring students up to the point they need to deal with the overwhelming and contradictory array of information they're confronted with online. So, if we want to have the resource, we've got to invest in it. And one of the ways we need to do that is conduct high quality research that shows the benefits of school library professionals and the school library resource more broadly.
Well, and friends, I'm just going to stop talking. Dr. Merga could just talk. I'm just going to listen to you. And this is just going to be a solo effort. You don't need me here today. I do want to say, friends, Dr. Merga has been a researcher for a long time. You have an incredible, catalog of papers you've published and research you've done. You have, it's extensive. You clearly, this isn't a newfound passion of yours. This is deeply seated in your soul. I have a lot of friends who are working on advanced degrees and considering going into getting furthering their education and doing this kind of research. And I know that you and your wealth of research, friends, all it takes is looking at all of the work cited in Dr. Merga's books to appreciate that you've been connected with the research community and school librarianship for a very long time.
Thanks, Amy. But, there's no gatekeeping in this space. We want people to come in with passion. We want people to come in with alternative perspectives who have lived experience that extends, what is already happening in that space. We need an infusion of diverse voices. We need an infusion of people from cultural contexts and geographic contexts outside the core that we currently have. We need to get that multiplicity of perspectives to really get that rich understanding of what's happening in the school library workforce internationally.
Well, and friends, this is why you need to be on LinkedIn, because if you want to find Dr. Merga and connect with Dr. Merga, you're going to be doing this through LinkedIn. And I'm telling you, you won't be disappointed. I am so grateful you're here today. Thank you very much. So friends, I was so excited to get a sneak peek at Dr. Merga's book, Creating a Reading Culture in Primary and Secondary Schools, A Practical Guide. And I can't tell you how excited I am, because when I finally got my hands on it, I have absolutely just littered it with Post-it notes and all the questions now I get to ask the author herself. So this is really exciting for me because, I have to ask, this book is a culmination of a lot of your efforts. How long ago did you get the idea that you wanted to write this book?
Well, before I jump into that, I just want to thank you so much for that endorsement, Amy. It's absolutely terrifying to, go through that process. And when I was thinking, who should I ask? Who's an expert in the field? Who's got kind of that dynamic perception of what's currently happening? And I was like, I'm gonna crawl up to Amy's inbox and be like, please, Amy, please endorse my book. So I was really grateful that you wrote such a kind endorsement and, you showed that wealth of expertise that you have. So I really appreciated that. And as you know, your question kind of leads into, I was thinking about doing this for a long time. So obviously I was deeply invested and hopeful that the reader would, be able to connect with it and that it would serve the purpose which I intended. And that purpose is really strongly to kind of, show that supportive research for the crucial work that school library professionals do in building a reading culture. Show exactly what the research-supported steps are to make that happen in the real world, and then show how to actually practically make that happen and evaluate that so that there's powerful data that we can use within the library space and beyond it to really advocate for what we're doing and to show, yes, look, here we've got some crystal clear benefits that have been established. We've exceeded our expectations. We've met our goals. And in the contemporary library environment, that's what really kind of encouraged me to tackle this particular book, because I feel like in many ways the contemporary school can be somewhat hostile to what we do in libraries because we're not always, kind of ticking boxes that are clearly visible to kind of external parties. And we're always being evaluated, and people are always, trying to figure out, can we continue to justify our expenditure on this resource, which is why we see encroachment into the school library facility. It gets taken over for other purposes. So as part of that narrative, I saw a really strong need to not only show that research-supported base for what school libraries are doing, but also show, how to make that really powerful argument that speaks the language of leadership, that speaks the language of data, to show the power of what we do.
Well, and friends, I think there isn't a single person listening who can't relate to all the things that you have talked about. And when we just talk about losing physical space of our libraries, our learning commons, our media centers, I feel like sometimes I'm sort of a glacier during global warming, because it just seems like every time I turn around, I've lost some more space. And if it's, honestly, throughout my career, the space that I was able to occupy was sort of taken up by, we need some place to put the copy room, or, our speech therapist now needs an office. And since you're not working in that area, we're just going to kind of put a divider there. And the social worker had to take one of my spaces. I truly realize that, this isn't an American thing. This is a global thing. And as somebody who tries to get a temperature reading on what it is like to be a school librarian around the world, I'm telling you, you've nailed it. You've absolutely nailed it, because it's everywhere. And so I'm grateful for all the work that you do, because I think it is the kind of advocacy that can move mountains when people realize the extensive research that goes into what you've done. The first time you and I spoke, I asked you for some clarification, but for listeners who are meeting you for the very first time, could you please explain the term school library professional, which you are using in your writing when you do your research?
Sure. So I use school library professional because my books are always for an international audience. And, if you pin it down to a certain kind of nomenclature, it's not always internationally accepted. We know that around the world, the qualification paths that we need to take in order to become someone recognized as a school library professional also really highly varies, even within nations in some contexts. That obviously adds to a lot of ambiguity around the role. So what I do is use that term school library professional to refer to a qualified person that works in the school library space and has made a focus of their career on really kind of building their capacity in that space. Typically, a school library professional is a lifelong learner who's actively engaged with continually building their skills within that space. And as their, schools' requirements for the role continue to burgeon over time, that school library professional continues to, struggle to stay on the front foot of, meeting the school's needs and being responsive to, the students' evolving needs as well. So it's an incredibly dynamic role that requires a kind of creative, really engaged individual with that passion for, advocacy for what they do. So that's when I'm talking about a school library professional, that's the kind of person that I'm kind of referring to, and hopefully that resonates with you.
Well, and didn't your last book have an appendices? It was like 50 different words used to describe the people who occupy this space. What an obstacle when you're trying to nail down data with people who all go by different titles.
It can be frustrating. And I guess the thing that little bit chafes with me is that for a while there seemed to be a bit of a shame around saying I'm a school librarian, or, and so we had to call ourselves the school magical technology superstar, or the school, something else, so that it was almost like a rebranding because the old brand was felt to be deficient. But I kind of come from the perspective that rather than needing to rebrand ourselves, it's, possibly more valuable to more effectively show what we do. So guess what? School librarian includes an amazing array of comprehensive skills, constantly burgeoning to, accommodate understanding of new technologies such as the impact of AI on information literacy and things like that. Hopefully we don't need to change our names and rebrand ourselves in the sense of, changing our titles, but rather, really build on that advocacy around, getting that understanding of the scope of what we do and how that's not a static thing, how it's constantly evolving to be responsive over time.
Well, and friends, as somebody who's tried to, reclaim my title of librarian, I occupy a space that my official title is Information Research Technology Specialist. And I said, oh, you mean a librarian? I was like, why don't we just say librarian? Because that's what I am. I love how you center the school library and school library professionals in your writing. I love being celebrated and being recognized as absolutely vital in the creating of a reading culture.
And you play such an important role. And I guess that's another issue. When you have a title that says you're a technology specialist, it ignores what you're doing in terms of developing a reading culture, where you're really a literacy engagement specialist. I mean, how many titles could we give you that specifically honed in on those roles that you have? I mean, you'd be wearing so many hats, it would be ridiculous. But the reality is you're playing a deep role in terms of fostering that lifelong reader orientation in young people. And, you've got partners within the school and beyond it. You've got language arts or teachers in the US. We call them English teachers in the UK and Australia. And they're often a great partner. But they have to spend their time focusing with curricular elements that you aren't necessarily constrained with to the same extent. So you have the opportunity to listen to the students and connect with their interest with reading, create environments that support that reading, resource them and connect them with materials that will resonate with them as individuals, and have that connection with them that makes them consider themselves and their identities and, weigh up the possibility of becoming a lifelong reader, weigh up the possibility of, getting socially supported by peers and by, respected adults in their lives to, pick up a book and get into a book and enjoy the literacy benefits of that kind of engagement. So your role is absolutely crucial, and it doesn't necessarily overlap with what anyone else is doing around literacy engagement.
Absolutely. I am, at some point, I'm going to throw out this infographic, and it says something about, it's not a new infographic, but it says something about, librarians are a bargain. And then it starts to itemize all the different jobs we perform and all of the salaries that are commanded by those people who do those jobs, and then recognize that the average salary of somebody who does my job, and yet I manage to accomplish the vast array of other jobs. And we are a bargain when it comes to being an asset in our school communities. Creating a reading culture in a school is so vital that the school library professionals everywhere can actually count on this being a guaranteed interview question, regardless of where you are in the world or where you work or the ages of the students you support. I stand by that, and I can't be sure, but I have to imagine I've interviewed for enough of these jobs. And one of those driving questions is, how do you plan to build a culture of reading? And I will say right now, every single interview I've ever sat in on, whether I've been interviewing or I have been across the table hiring somebody, has been, what are you going to do to build a culture of reading? I can't think of a more central focus to what we do every day.
Absolutely. And what's been really interesting in recent times is that we've seen that kind of role of that reading engagement role kind of move from the periphery to a bit more of a central position when we're talking about students' literacy. So it used to be kind of, we'll focus on this and we'll focus on that. And then there'd be a kind of, by the way, and we'll also get them liking reading, and it would be kind of tangential without that full understanding of how young people's attitudes towards and frequency of engagement in reading actually really do not only build but also maintain a breadth of literacy skills, particularly around vocabulary and reading comprehension. And, really recently as last year, we saw in England the reading framework get revised so that building and evaluating reading culture, instead of being a peripheral consideration, is now an entire section. It's section 8 in that document if you're interested in taking a look. So that means that now we've got all of the library professionals in England being, empowered by this expectation that the things that they've already, been doing for such a long time, those research-supported activities to build these rich cultures of reading engagement, are now being seen as really pivotal and a key pillar in fostering literacy and, maintaining literacy development across the student's schooling experience. And one of the things that comes out of that, of course it does, because when we, mandate this kind of thing, there has to be accountability, right? Is that expectation that there'd be that clear and visible evaluation of what we do, which again links into the purpose of the book. They're really easy ways to tell the story of what you've achieved. And they don't have to be that arduous. And they also don't have to be in a kind of a language or a kind of a format that is resistant to what you personally prefer in terms of showing, that story and that experience. But there's a lot to be said for evaluation, not just to meet the needs of, the very, top policymakers or the school leader, but also to connect with parents and show them the power of what's happening in your schools. Show them the stories of those rich experiences where, students who have been resistant get won over and, become engaged in that reading, and invite those parents in around what they can be doing at home, regardless of their own literacy interests or levels, to support their, young person's reading journey. So I feel like, this is really novel. These times are really novel in that we're starting to really look at reading engagement differently and appreciate it differently, which should mean that the bastions of reading engagement in the school, the leaders, the school library professionals, should theoretically be more appreciated through this kind of shift.
Well, and forgive me, but as somebody who has read your book cover to cover, I did not see a chapter on what prizes we should be offering our students for the number of pages that they're reading on any given day. You didn't go into any depth of is it a pizza party that the students get if they read a certain number of books? Am I right that so much of this has to do with fostering that intrinsic love of reading, which is going to sustain us much longer than a pizza party for the class that gets the most pages read during, March's reading month or whatever we're celebrating that day? I can't help but think that when you are looking at making long-term, lifelong changes in our habits, we're doing this without the benefit of sticker charts and visits to the prize box.
We can do to encourage, young people to read may play a role. There's, obviously a bit of controversy over extrinsic motivators, which is what you're talking about there. But, I've had some students say, what got me into reading was that competition. And up to that point, I'd never really thought about reading about pirate romances or vampire werewolf hybrids or whatever, floated their particular boat. And it was an entry point for me. But it's never only that, it's always some kind of sustaining culture. Ability to access the library during class time is obviously one absolute basic that school library professionals in many contexts find themselves in arm wrestles over. Even getting the students into the library during class time can be incredibly challenging. But if they can't access books and they don't have many books at home, what do we expect them to be reading? So it's something, that we really need to be doing. So, there are all of these ongoing things in the ways that we socialize and resource young readers that I talk about in the book in relation to the research. That, extrinsic motivators or book of the month or, book week or whatever, it will play a role, in maintaining interest, but it obviously can't be all that we do. And if we think, oh, yes, we're doing book week once a year, so we've got reading, engagement sorted, tick that box, obviously, that's almost laughable when we look at what school library professionals are actually doing behind the scenes, day in, day out, to foster and maintain that connection between young people and, reading material that will be engaging to them on that individual level. The level of expertise, the level of understanding of literature that might appeal to people, the level of negotiation skills that you need to kind of bring to bear to, draw in the classroom teachers and the leadership into kind of seeing things from your perspective and bringing that research to them and helping them to get that deeper understanding of your purpose. There's amazing skill set involved that school library professionals are kind of showing in that regard.
Well, and I'm deciding that this is the argument I'm going to go with the next time I try and ask for permission to have my Learning Commons open at lunch. We are going to engage those readers. And if they have access to the library during lunch, then we have another opportunity to build that reading culture, because that's really one of the free times that they have, and they can come and be in our Learning Commons. Dr. Merga, when it comes to making school-wide changes, you emphasize that this necessitates the school leadership and classroom teachers to be a part of this culture change. Am I correct that the school library professionals are what you call the middle leadership that you discuss in Chapter 4?
Absolutely. And sometimes it's official and that you're a middle leader and you've been given some kind of a title or recognition or workload that's, oh, yes, excellent, I'm a recognized leader. But I live on planet Earth and I speak to school library professionals on the regular So I know that in many cases, you're just expected to lead a whole school reading culture. There's no official recognition of how that is a leadership role within the school, but the reality is you're out there trying to get change management happening. You're out there, doing all of those negotiations and, working on the kind of resourcing side around procurement and, doing all of these kind of really complex tasks that we expect the higher level leaders to do, often with far less support and, a far smaller budget, and you find yourself almost expected to do magic, on the spot. And you're upskilling constantly to become more effective, and when you're getting rejected, you're bouncing back and finding ways to become, find another entry point, building your resilience as far as you can, but you're not magical. So sometimes those rejections are going to really, slow you down a bit for a while, and you'll need a bit of emotional regrouping. And that's where, those professional associations we have, those connections we have with other members of the school library community is so crucial, because, that means when we've taken it on the chin, we can have a bit of a regroup, we can have a bit of a strategy discussion, or even just a bit of a whinge about, things are a bit hard at the moment and I've hit the wall too many times and I've got to go back into negotiations with leadership so I can, get that collection up, that robust current collection that meets these actually widely diverse interests of my students. They don't all like one thing. I mean, unfortunately, young people are like adults. They don't all just like one thing. And, some of them have got wild and wacky interests. And, some of them have got interests that change every week. So you need to, be keeping this mobile, this rich and interesting collection that continues to feed that passion that young people have for reading, because there are so many competing interests that will snap up their attention and time if, reading kind of falls by the side of the road because it's not being adequately resourced and supported. So, yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting and dynamic area, but as a middle manager within your school, leading a reading culture, there needs to be recognition of that. And I feel like almost you need to start using that language when you refer to yourself. I am leading change. I'm in charge of leading this reading culture. You need to actually refer to yourself as someone that is leading, so that there is that understanding that it's not just you kind of shelving books 24/7 or whatever, that's not what you do. But, if you keep, slipping that word leading, leader into those kinds of conversations you're having, hopefully there might be some kind of light bulb moments around the kinds of resourcing that you might need to support those initiatives.
Well, and I love, first of all, you mentioned the word magician. I know that there are listeners tuning in right now who have been called a magician by their staff members more than once a week. And I'll tell you what, every once in a while you hear, Amy, you know everything. Or, Amy, you're a magician. Oh, Amy, you're amazing. You're a magician. And you know what? I internalize every single one of those. They mean something to me because to the person I just helped, I am a magician. One thing I want to mention, you were talking about, leading from the middle. And this reminds me because there is this element of PD that we're going to talk about. But when Madison Donnelly and I did a book report on the PD book, we were talking about using professional development to educate not just their staff members, but also our higher ups. Also, the administrators who are in the room during that professional development, that we have an opportunity to sway their thinking as well, and to never miss out on an opportunity, not just to educate the people that we are supporting, but also to educate the administrators who, at the end of the day, hold the purse strings and ultimately are in charge of our employment status. I can't help but think you talk about, talking about student choice and the diverse books which they all desire to have. And our teachers are really good about allowing for that independent reading. You can pick something that you want, but in order for us to have the books that our students want, we need funding. We need funding. That truly would be a magician who did not need funding. I mean, truly, it goes hand in hand. In order for us to be able to best support our students, we have to have a dedicated budget, which we can count on from year to year. Not just hey, we've got a grant, good news, you can get books this year. We have to be able to plan on it. I inherited a library years ago that nobody wanted to use. I didn't want to use. The average age of my library when I walked in the door was 2002. I had no interest in reading much of anything that was there. And I didn't feel bad that my students didn't either. And what it took was a really nice grant. And, unfortunately, some things take money. Some things take time and some things take both. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes when leaders look at a library and they see books on the shelf, they're like, what are you complaining about? You've got books on the shelf. They don't understand the importance of the diversity, the currency, particularly, if you're working in a school library community where there's a lot of churn through student populations and you get like an influx of refugee students from certain cultural backgrounds or a significant rise, or a change in that composition, you're obviously going to want to be resourcing books so that students can see themselves reflected in the literature.
I totally agree. In order for reading culture to have a chance of taking hold in a school, both our reading leadership and all the teachers, irrespective of the subjects they teach or their content focus, need to be role models for our students. And I feel that this goes hand in hand with the professional development which school library professionals would need to offer during the course of the year.
Absolutely. And, from the research we have, we know that not all classroom teachers like to read. Even classroom teachers who do like reading don't necessarily know how they can effectively be, role models around reading when they're, constantly under the pump meeting the curricular demands that they have. It's a constant effort for them to, be meeting their requirements, and perhaps a, teacher in the sciences or mathematics might not see that as having relevance for them. But, I've done a lot of work on, content area and disciplinary literacy and how, the gains that we make around reading comprehension in particular, that's a transferable skill set. I've worked with schools where, they've said, we've got a problem with our, students in the upper years of high school because they don't know the difference between the words describe, and explain, and these are, key vocabulary terms that have relevance across a range of learning areas. So we do see that, even in the maths and sciences, students are learning through their literacy skills. So, through what they read and what they hear, and they're also demonstrating their learning through their literacy skills. So they're going to be writing, perhaps a report in biology. They don't just magically transfer their ideas from their brain into the marker's head. There's that gateway, a requirement that the literacy skills be strong enough for effective communication. So what you're doing in the library has relevance for every learning area. So it should be, when you get into those conversations with the prospective role models for your students and, perhaps you're implementing a school-wide silent reading program, and that means that students will be reading sometimes in math or science. So to win those teachers over, they need to see the benefit for them. You've always got to be thinking, what does my audience need when you're pitching what the school library does? Well, they need their, students to be able to comprehend questions that they read on assessments so they know what to write. And if you talk to a math or a science teacher, one of the pet peeves they have, one of the things that really burns them at the end of the day is when they have a bright student who has a bit of a reading comprehension glitch or, not so strong in terms of reading comprehension, perhaps because they come to the school with a non-English speaking background. They get super frustrated because they know when they talk to the student that they know the content. But when it comes to writing and showing what they know, then, if there's a gap in that literacy ability, then they're not going to be able to perform at the level where they're actually at. So it should be relatively easy if you make sure you make that argument, on that level of what really matters to them, and also show what you can do in the school library to support specific, content area and disciplinary literacies that are relevant to their learning area. Then you can make those partnerships and relationships that you can then draw upon to say, hey, next time we're having a PD day, I've carved out, 45 minutes to run a seminar on how you can meaningfully connect with your students. But also I want to get you reading more. And I want to, get some books into the library that you're interested in, because I know you don't have much time. So if you tell me what you like, I'm going to get some really cool books for you and I'm going to bring them to you. And, then, you will have something to talk about with the students. We'll kickstart your own reading trajectory, but we'll do it in ways that don't, add extra burden to what you've already got balancing in your life with your work-life balance.
I want to mention right now, if you want to hear a really unique way that a school librarian supported an underserved population in her school, Jessica Fitzpatrick in episode 186, Teaming Up with Athletes, did a phenomenal job running a book club with many of the varsity sports in her school library in Texas. And when you team up with the coaches to pick out books that they want their athletes to read, having a book club with the athletes after practice, meet your readers where they are. And I love that because it demonstrates that all it takes is willingness on the part of the school library professional to make those efforts to reach out and try and find innovative ways to connect readers with the content that they would find most meaningful. And friends, I want to say another thing that's relevant when it comes to talking about the need we have to really grow our students' ability to read. We have to talk about their stamina, their reading stamina. In the United States, we have a standardized test, which has been around since I was in high school. It's called the SAT, and it's used for college entry. And across the board, it was made into a much shorter test, 45 minutes shorter, and the reading passages were made shorter because this group of students cannot handle the kind of reading, the rigor that it takes, the stamina that it takes to read and then extrapolate from a passage because they don't have those opportunities to really sort of exercise those skills and build that reading stamina. So the standardized test, instead of asking more of us as educators, they simply made the test shorter. They said they could get the same results with a shorter test because today's learner could not do what was expected of them in terms of reading the longer passages.
There are also a whole heap of other compounding factors that can lead to low reading comprehension relating to, different issues such as perhaps dyslexia or perhaps, they might be really, really amazing at reading comprehension in their first language, but, they're still acquiring reading comprehension in English. We don't know what's going on, but we do know that we've got high levels of the population, both in the US and Australia, of the adult population with low English literacy, particularly in the reading comprehension area. So that we've got young people coming up, struggling with stamina. Stamina is definitely a factor that is contributing to that. If we, expecting people to be able to read sustained passages, that's obviously something that we need to have practice in. You'll know for yourself when there's been a period where you haven't been able to deeply immerse yourself in reading, that when you try to get back into it, it's not that simple. Like you have to a little bit work at it. It might be a little bit hard at first to get that focus. And then, you slide into it again and you're like, oh, yes, I remember how to do this. It's almost like a muscle memory, But that's how it works, with what we know around neuroplasticity. The way we use our brain affects what we can do with our brain. And while it's not the only factor affecting, reading comprehension and performance, on, high-stakes testing, as we see, decreased demand and decreased requirement that we read text in a sustained way in school environments, but also beyond it, it's not going to be a big surprise when we do see those kinds of declines around reading stamina. So it's actually really interesting to me because having cognitive stamina more broadly is so crucial for so many roles. So, for example, if you want to work as an electrician fixing houses and you can't apply sustained attention to the task that you're doing because you haven't been, building your cognitive attentional stamina, that's actually dangerous. You're more likely to make a mistake that could lead to, perhaps, for a fatality or something like that. So I feel like in terms of, attentional stamina and cognitive stamina, we probably should give, a greater valuing of it within the school so that, we give those students those opportunities for sustained reading or sustained application of attention that can help them to kind of build those skills. But, we don't have a lot of research in the area, but what we have from a European context suggests that students are being exposed to shorter text within the class, and that's been happening over time. So if we decide it's something that students need to have, we need to take action now. If we decide we want young people to be able to apply sustained attention and read deeply and extract meaning, then we need to make those decisions now about what we're prioritizing in terms of, what's happening in the classroom and also within the library and also around access to library during class time.
Well, and I know it's definitely had an impact on a lot of us in the collections which we are developing because a lot of us are realizing that if you're not paying close attention to the page numbers, you're going to find yourself with a lot of books that you've just purchased which are over 300 pages. And unfortunately, there are a fair number of us for whom that's just a bridge too far. The students are not interested in investing that kind of time. If you can get something around 200 pages long, now we're in business. This reading stamina is not a new problem, but the fact that we're not trying to fix it is.
Absolutely. And I feel like this is where, the things that school library professionals do, like provide these entry points for students that, might be reluctant to even commit to a book because, whoa, cognitive demand. You're asking me to apply sustained attention to anything? That's not a thing that I want to do with my free time. Thank you very much. I would much rather get on the games and catch up with my mates and have a good time. So you've got to sell it to them. And one of the ways that, I love that school library professionals do this is through the read aloud opportunities they provide both within and beyond the library, where they kickstart their interest in a book by reading it out loud, using engaging voices, possibly pausing on the really suspenseful bits. And if you want to know what happens to them, do they live or die? You will need to get the book out of the library and find it out, and they may Google the spoiler, you can't control that. But you need to kind of show, why would we even bother? Because there is something that books have to offer that we can't get through some of the other things that we're doing with our time. And that's that incredibly deep, immersive experience where we go on that journey with the protagonist and we live their life. We see through their eyes. We develop our capacity for empathy through, considering their perspective and actually being them in some cases. So that is actually one of the things that avid readers talk about, enjoying the most about that immersive experience. Now, if you haven't had that experience, and you have only, occupied worlds that have been created for you by the brilliant artists behind games and things like that, and you've never had that opportunity of the self-created world that happens in that interaction with the book that you read. So it's not entirely self-created, but yeah, you do have to do a bit more of the legwork. You don't get that feeling for what it is like to inhabit that world that you have co-created, the way that you've created the sense of smell and touch and, feel and light and everything in that space is a beautiful thing that you only know it if you've experienced. So one way of giving them that entry point is by reading out loud, and we need to have that as a respected instructional strategy. We need to have that, seen as something really important and valuable for young people in terms of not only providing that immersive entry point, but also providing access for students who struggle still with, foundational literacy skills, even in high school. And if they want to kind of access high-level vocabulary and high-level kind of text, the reading aloud is going to be that bridge for them that, enables them to have that exposure.
Absolutely. And I think you just mentioned a lot of things which lead to the next question. April, at least in the United States, is recognized as School Library Month. And you actually, in one part of your book, listed 40 ways in which we promote reading engagement. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm tempted to include every single one of these in my newsletters this month and our student broadcasts, because our students do the news and the last 10 minutes of the day, and they get to make all the announcements. And I think I'm just going to insert some of these into those student broadcasts because it really is an important reminder that school librarians bring so much to the communities we support.
Absolutely. And feel free to do that. My work is there for you to use. I do, as I mentioned last time we chatted, I do try to make translational works that are open access built into them through the platform called The Conversation. And you can literally just cut and paste that into your school newsletter and just attribute it to where it came from. And there's no IP issues around that, so that I've tried to pitch those at a level for really engaging the public, thinking about what parents want to hear, because that's what that platform is created for, to create a bridge between researchers and the general population. And you can only get through the pitch if they believe that, people are actually interested in what you have to say, which I find a useful barrier, because it means, and I should always be sitting down as a researcher and thinking about, what do people need to know? What does my audience need to hear? Am I communicating what I've discovered in my research in a way that can resonate beyond academia with professionals in schools, but also, parents from diverse backgrounds and those sorts of things? So that's one of the things I touch on in the book, that importance of communicating and reporting on what's happening in the library in ways that are really responsive to the kinds of diverse audiences that you might need to target it at. Because I do get frustrated sometimes when I see superstar genius school library professionals getting disrespected by leadership because they are talking about the things they know are valuable, but not crossing that bridge to what the leader needs to hear and in the language that they will recognize and that will resonate with them. So I'm just constantly, one of the other research interests I have is in research communication, so I do publish a bit in that area as well. But I'm so interested in making sure that we get really effective and targeted in the way we advocate for ourselves by finding, and when I talk about this in a group, I often show a Venn diagram, and there's what you know as a school library professional is really important and what the leadership actually prioritize, and that little spot in the middle, where we can have that intersection point where you need to really lean in to that kind of shared interest space and really sell what you're doing there. And then as they start to resource the library, you can try to expand what's happening in that space so they can come to appreciate some of the other things you're doing that currently on the periphery of their priority list.
It's a great strategy when you make your priorities solving a problem that your administrator has. When you do something nice like that, all of a sudden they realize, wait, you helped me. I didn't realize that could happen. And yes, so definitely move in there and figure out a problem you can fix for your principal. And you will find that the next time you need something, you might have a more receptive audience. And friends, we'll be sure to link the conversation and that resource. It's also linked in your other episode, but we'll link it in this episode as well. When it comes to recognizing all the important stakeholders, you discuss the connection with home and our families as important to the success of any school initiative to build and sustain a reading culture. We aren't to assume anything when it comes to our students' home life. And I think we need to just be very aware that, we shouldn't assume anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting is that because I've done quite a bit of kind of work for schools as a consultant, sometimes I work with schools in a higher socioeconomic community. And, there's been that kind of sense of complacent expectation that there has been parent support in the home, that there are books available because the students come from a relatively wealthy background. But then we've actually canvassed that and we've actually asked students, about the number of books in the home. And we've also asked parents. And we've found that, it's far, far lower and shockingly so, to the point where leadership in the school has, gone, well, goodness me, we're going to have to really do something about access to the library because they're simply not going to be resourced at home. The other thing that's really funny is that not funny, but interesting, is that when you will want to look at, the number of books in a home in your community, you need to ask the students as well as the parents, or just ask the students, because I have a feeling that the parents may tend to slightly overinflate the number of books to kind of, satisfy your expectations. Whereas students, I think, are perhaps more pragmatic about, what's actually available in the home for them, because they're the ones obviously looking for books for themselves, So yeah, just capturing parent perspective might not be the best way to canvass that if you're looking at doing that in your school context. But regardless of where you're working, getting those two-way exchanges with parents that show that the parent input is valued, regardless of their kind of cultural background or level of educational attainment. You can have parents from any background, from any kind of level of educational attainment, being a really powerful and effective advocate for their child. You don't need to have, a high level of literacy skills to encourage your student to be an avid reader. You just need to show that it's something that is important and valuable and that can be enjoyable, and model that, at home, and, encourage that and resource that. And if you don't have a lot of money, connecting with the public library and connecting with the school librarian and, all these sorts of things, and it needs to be that kind of mutual exchange. Yes, you need to give them a lot of information about the kind of important role they can play in their child's life as a partner in this, but you also need to be able to listen and hear their needs and make those kind of individual connections. What's really interesting is a couple of years back, I did a keynote in South Korea at the behest of the Ministry of Culture there in their National Library. It was a beautiful place. But at the end of the session, this lovely mum came and talked to me and said, look, thanks, because I didn't know I could still read aloud, to my son now that he's older. And coming to this session makes me realise that I'm not holding him back by doing that. I'm not wasting anyone's time, because he still really liked it and she still really liked it. But there was just that sense that, am I, providing training wheels, beyond the point where they're needed, No, you can keep reading aloud right up to adulthood and beyond, because you're going to continue to get that exposure to vocabulary. You're going to continue to get those opportunities for kind of deep engagement with text, but also, perhaps most importantly, you're communicating that this is something that is so important to mum that she's putting aside, time in the busy day to have that special one-on-one time with the son, to have that, special opportunity that's just for them to share the book together. And that, on a social and emotional level, it's incredibly powerful communication and valuing of a practice. If you want that son to think, yes, books are important and they're always going to be important, and reading is something I need to keep doing on a sustained level if I want to maintain and develop those skills, there's no more powerful way of communicating that than having, a supportive guardian or parent or, relative or in the home that can really build and support that orientation.
Absolutely. Friends, I have nothing else to say because Dr. Merga said it all. Honestly, you're doing a lot of heavy lifting today, Dr. Merga, and our listeners, thank you. A grateful audience is grateful to hear somebody other than me. So a dedicated time for silent reading in school is essential to creating a reading culture. I love that you itemize all the things that go into making sure this endeavor is successful. Spoiler, friends, a school library staffed by a school library professional are two of those criteria. And this isn't hard, it isn't rocket science, but the fact is a dedicated time for silent reading. And I know everybody like me, when they read this, is trying to envision this working in our current places of employment and asking teachers to give up just 5 minutes of your class period. And then we'll take those, 5 minutes and compress them all into one, say, 20-minute period with passing, we give, not that anybody would lose 20 minutes of their class time, but we're asking you to give up 5 minutes. We're going to take those 5 minutes and push them all together and have a dedicated time where everybody, top down, we all read.
It's really important that if we're going to do it, we need to enter into it with a commitment to even, making that fidelity to best practice. So what often happens, is that, we're going to do it, but you haven't won over the teachers. So they kind of, I don't know, that sounds like a waste of time. We're already running behind on the curriculum. So I'm going to use that opportunity to let the students who haven't done their homework catch up on their homework. If you don't win the teachers over at the outset, they're not going to support the initiative. Then you're going to have issues around fidelity to practice that you may or may not be able to capture. Then at the end, when, the leadership wants to see that there's been any kind of benefit for this program for the school around borrowing or improved literacy scores or whatever, when you've got so many classes, you haven't actually been doing it, then it's really hard to show benefit. So we know, from the research that we've got that strong evidence around, opportunities to read, like actual reading and what that means in terms of literacy outcomes. But the evidence isn't as strong for actual silent reading within schools. And I would strongly suspect that it has a lot to do with poor fidelity to best practice models. So the book outlines what best practice looks like, and there are easy things that you can do within the school to optimize the chances that students are going to have that enjoyable experience. And there are practical things included in there. Like, for example, if you were expecting students to read in the science lab on a little stool hovering over a Bunsen burner, you might want to have a pile of cushions in the corner. So during that reading time, they can move away from those benches, sit on a cushion instead, and bam, actually enjoy, sitting down and reading. Because I don't think many of us as adults would be super comfortable kind of balancing on that stool over their Bunsen burner, trying to get into an immersive experience where we've already got, our cognitive stamina completely, perhaps underperforming anyway at the moment because of the challenges of modern life. So let's not add unnecessary barriers, you know what I mean? And that book just goes through, getting a pile of cushions isn't that hard, and it's not that expensive either. So I've tried to go where possible for no or low cost things that you can do to optimize the chances of success. we need to be also asking the question, are we actually doing this, And I'm not saying I want you to go around with a clipboard and, ooh, let's have a look at how it's being done in this classroom. Oh, no, 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 no. And then arresting the teacher and dragging them away and throwing them in an imaginary library prison or anything crazy like that. But what I am suggesting is that we need to build that understanding of the value of fidelity to practice. And while teachers rightfully are concerned about students who are falling behind in homework, they need to understand that that reading opportunity can offer as much value or more value for the teacher, in the sense that it's building those gateway literacy skills that students need to learn and demonstrate their learning across every subject there is.
Well, and I would also be a strong advocate for inviting all those science teachers in their labs to bring their students to the Learning Commons during their silent sustained reading period. Because for me, I can, all I had was this visual. I'm like, you're absolutely correct. There are no comfortable seats in the labs. So we need to bring them all down to the Learning Commons and give them that opportunity to read in comfort. Chapter 3 recognizes the reality that a sustained effort will require a committed source of funding and sustained educator and leader engagement. I would like to know more about the importance of collective ownership and distributed responsibilities.
Sure. And the thing is, part of that magician role that school library professionals have that we've been talking about today is that people expect you to be able to do everything. And you do everything. Something needs to be done, you make it happen. But the danger of doing it all yourself is that if anything happens to you, then no one else feels like it's something that, is their responsibility. No one else is bought in. No one else has co-constructed or felt like they've had a say in what's happening. You need to give a voice to those science and math teachers so that they can feel that they've been listened to and that you're kind of meeting them on that common playing field and you're listening to their concerns and thinking about what could be done to kind of help them within their priorities and spaces. If you, and it's happened, where someone's created a really amazing program and then shifted schools, and the second they're gone, bam, that program's done. That's dust. Because who's going to take it over? There's not been that investment. So I know we are often, and we don't want to put the burden on anyone else by involving them. We look around ourselves and, oh, everyone's so time poor. You're just as time poor, perhaps, if not more, but that doesn't stop you from doing it. But it's yes, they might be time poor, but there is something in it for them. And if you can help them to understand that value, even, you'll be learning how to do, evaluation together. You'll be learning a transferable skill set around change management together. This is not just relevant for building a reading culture. This is valuable for any initiative that you want to launch in a school context and evaluate. So you can sell it on a number of levels, and you need to, though, and not just do it yourself and be a magician or a superhero, or it runs the risk of having a very short life.
Yeah, I've met a lot of librarians who, like me, sort of assume that if, it's just easier if I do it. It's just easier. There's less risk that it won't get done. And that's exhausting, and it's not sustainable. So at some point that produces a great deal of burnout, I imagine. I knew a handful of school librarians who have become school administrators. And while it is expected that all school library professionals enact programs which will impact the school writ large, whether or not the school then participates is a different matter altogether. Chapter 4 focuses on implementation planning and change management, which you've mentioned that term, and I'll be honest, it's not something that I had on the tip of my tongue. As someone who has never taken an educational leadership course, I am not versed in the term change management, nor have I had a great deal of experience in implementing something such as the scale of a school-wide program where everybody is participating collectively.
And the interesting thing is that while, the kind of nomenclature might be new to us and the concepts might be new to us, I think we've been doing it from day one and learning everything kind of the hard way. So this is why with this book, I wanted to just, in really simple terms, draw on the literature and come up with a really, simple 4 steps. And nothing in the book is prescriptive. If you look at those 4 steps and you're like, yeah, I've already done that, I don't need to do that one, or, I'm going to go straight to step 2 and I'm going to, build my team. I need to know who I need to get on my side. And there's something nice, about, letting people know that you're on a team. You're working together for that shared goal. So each of those 4 steps has a different purpose, and I'm, not expecting people to kind of tick off the boxes as they go through them, but at least just think about them and think, all right, how can what's in this section, how can I kind of use that in my context in order to achieve my goals? Yes, I need to make sure that I'm, thinking about how I'm going to communicate that powerful vision for change and make sure that vision it resonates not just within the school but also beyond it, so you can secure, the support of parents and also, broader entities in the school community, such as if you've got a relationship with the public library. And, and then the planning is really crucial, and that's something that features in the book. What I've tried to do is add templates and stuff like that, which again, you can use or not use. But sometimes, when it comes to planning, we know what we want to do, but then when we want to explain it to others, again, we want to just transfer what's from our minds into their brains, so that they can kind of get where we're at, and having a template that we can kind of draw on to show, okay, this is what we'll be doing, and this is what it will look like if it's successful. And this is the time period that we'll be running across. And here are the people responsible for making it happen. And here is how we'll evaluate if it worked or not. I'm not saying you'd have to do that for every element of a reading culture, but there might be a few kind of key components that you're hoping will get better resourced by your leadership, or that you feel would be a really great advocacy push for like getting a better investment across the school community. So it is pretty important to do a little bit of planning around how those elements will be, rolled out, particularly if you want to show there was a change in something. So if you want to say that, you've kind of created this initiative in the library and it's going to increase borrowing, if you haven't captured the borrowing data at baseline before you rolled out that initiative, you cannot say down the track that there was a change during that period. So it might be, students' attitudes towards reading that you're looking to see a change on. If you know that and you plan for that, then you can make sure that before you do what you want to do, you're capturing where students' attitudes currently at through a survey or another simple tool. And the book goes into a lot of detail about all the different kinds of ways that you can capture, that data at the outset that aren't going to be massively arduous, that don't involve hours and hours of student time, are relatively, not that intrusive to kind of make happen. But, it's all part of telling that story. And, not just so that you survive and so that your hours don't get cut and that your staffing doesn't get cut and that your resourcing doesn't get cut, but also so you can thrive and show, what the magnitude of what you're doing and how it's leading to changes in the, experiences of students within the school. So I think it's really important.
Well, and I think you'll definitely get some teachers on board if you can save them some of those steps by having them incorporate some of their classroom goals into the larger goal of increasing that reading that's happening and building that reading culture. I know I have to collect data, and when I connected with my 11th grade teachers, working together, we realized that we could satisfy the data collection, which both of us had to do independently, we could now do together. And it was like, oh, why didn't we think of this before? In speaking with guests I've met over the years, I can say with some certainty that data is the language that our administrators understand. School library professionals recognize the importance of data collection if we hope to ensure the continuation of any of our efforts in the libraries. Chapter 5, Evaluation, delves into the methods for gathering different kinds of data and how best to report this to our stakeholders.
I understand, in most of our contexts, having the quantitative data is absolutely crucial, and that when we talk about data in schools, we're normally talking about numbers. But what I'm trying to kind of push in that chapter is, yes, numbers important. I've already been banging on about how important it is we meet the leadership where they are and we speak in a voice that will resonate with them and we give them what they need, But the other thing is qualitative data also can play a really powerful role in the way we communicate what's happening in the library. And when we talk about qualitative data, yes, that includes, things that our students may have said in interviews or, things like that, but also drawings that they've made of how they sit within the library, visual diaries of their reading, experience, videos where permissions have been granted of students enjoying the opportunity to be read to aloud and laughing their heads off at a funny, joke that comes up in a book and those sorts of things. They also tell a rich and powerful story for what's happening in the library. So while my book, takes people through how to tell the story using numbers, based, partly on some of my previous work, we published a book on quantitative data analysis in education that you can get through Springer if you're interested in that kind of thing. But I'm also really interested in the role of other data sources. And I feel like, yes, you can show, for example, parents the numbers. And yes, look, the library's improved, through our initiatives, we've improved our borrowing rates. But I think parents would also like to see what that looks like in terms of, this is the amazing drawing that the student made. When we changed the furnishings or whatever, we invested in this thing. This is how the student, now feels in this space. And that story, might resonate even more with a parent. They see the drawing that their child has made that shows how comfortable they are, now in that space. Quantitative data, very valuable, but qualitative data, particularly, you can integrate it with quantitative data in ways that tell a deeper story. So that richer reality, because I feel like when you're in the library and you're hearing the voices of the excited students, or you're hearing that pin drop silence where everyone's, really engaged, or, all the different tonalities and variations that are happening in the environment, and you can't convey, sometimes it's hard to convey what that's meaning for students' experience, particularly if you're rolling out wellbeing related initiatives that relate to literacy, you're creating a space that you're really promoting as a safe space for all the little oddbods in your school that, might not be super comfortable out on the sports field, but need a little bit of a safe space where they can vibe with other introverts and feel that sense of belonging. What that looks like, you're going to really struggle to capture that in quantitative data. There might be qualitative ways to show that rich space and to show, student response that, are respectful of student anonymity, but at the same time, give you that power to, not just tell the story in the language of the leadership, though that is important, but also think about, when you think about, wow, my library works so well today, that doesn't usually look like numbers. That's not you sitting there, ticking off a box, well, my borrowing stats went through the roof today. It might some days be that. But other days, it was a vibe or a thing or a moment or an environment or, a sense of something that you could convey through the use of qualitative data.
As the non-scientist in the conversation, I'm familiar with the term anecdata, and using the human sort of stories that we can document and use as evidence in the sort of year-end documentation, which we are all obligated to provide to our administrators. Especially as librarians, we don't oftentimes have the same kinds of the numbers that classroom teachers can generate. So I'm thinking about all the things that we use to justify what we do and show this as evidence to our administrators. And so much of that is providing that evidence. But we document things like the student letters that they write to us, and the teachers when they write us a grateful email that explains all the things that we were able to do together. And all of this is incredibly compelling. What are the benefits of evaluating the initiatives that school library professionals implement?
It's really crucial that we be able to advocate for what's happening and give the people outside the library that insight into what's happening, because, that's all the relationship building you do with the classroom teachers, all the relationship building you do with leadership and parents and people in the broader school community is dependent on you getting them invested in what's happening in that space, because you want them to be able to have that level of understanding and that valuing of what's happening. So that's where when you've asked them to invest in perhaps soft furnishings so that, you've got a little struggling group of students that, are perhaps not sleeping that well at home or whatever, and that they're going to come in the morning if they're soft furnishings and have a little bit of a chance to curl up, and maybe you're going to even pop a little blankie over them and just regen, and we've had, powerful stories even of athletes that are, working really hard, and then if they know that that space is available to them, then they will just go. And you don't know what their home like is life. You don't know, how many jobs they're working if they're in high school. You don't know, in many cases what kind of pressures are going on. But if they know they've got that safe space they can find, and you can show that the space is being used, to support those kinds of students. I mean, it's hard to capture in numbers the value of that for a young person, to have a place where they can go and have a complete sense of refuge. So the thing is, you are constantly pushed to show return on investment. Your school leader is investing in you and also in the environment. But the way you show return on investment should be on your terms and celebrating those aspects of the library that really transform students' learning experiences and, also have implications for, who they're going to be after school, If they talk about their libraries in adulthood, that was the place that I could go. No matter what was happening at home, I could curl up in that space and I wasn't afraid there. So, that's something, and every single school is going to have students like that in there. They need to know there's a no questions asked spot where they can have that downtime. Because often, when they don't have recourse for those kinds of environments, we'll see surges in behaviour management issues because it's going to be acting out in another way. And, if we just provide that affordance, it can, provide that safer outlet for students to kind of recover themselves and have a moment. So, yes, we need to evaluate. We need to use numbers and speak the language of leaders, but we also need to make sure that we're showing that nuanced painting or what it means to be an effective school library in your context in 2024. It's so much more than numbers. The experiential component that's often most effectively conveyed through the qualitative elements needs to also be captured.
Dr. Merga, I can't tell you how grateful I am to be able to have this conversation and press record to make sure that we have the opportunity to share this with listeners around the world. I am grateful to you. I appreciate you do this for a living, and you at the university, and your students are very, very lucky. We are so grateful because you've given so generously of yourself. I am always excited to talk with you, and it doesn't have to happen after you write your next book. We can talk more often, if you like. But would you please, we mentioned earlier, you're on LinkedIn if people need to reach out to you and would like to learn more about your work and dig in deeper and benefit truly from the wealth of research that you provide. But Dr. Merga, thank you so much for joining us. Let us know, what are you doing these days when you're not writing a book?
When I'm not writing a book, I'm trying to get up that international orientation towards the school library research program. I don't know if this is going to work, to be honest. I'm investing energy. I'm trying to reach out, trying to build capacity. I'm trying to kind of open up opportunities within my own university to have, enthusiastic school library professionals come and, do higher degrees with research such as Masters or PhD with me, doing what I can, to really seed that space, get that space, really up and active because, again, as I mentioned at the start, we've been talking, about the need in this area. We've even had a parliamentary inquiry in Australia in 2011 that said there was a desperate need for further library workforce research. It hasn't happened, So, and I know, talking to my colleagues in the US and the UK that it's not an isolated concern. So what I'm really hoping is that I can get commitment from, international experts and international professional associations to really buy into the idea of, getting up a robust international research plan, giving me some clues about where I can get some kind of investment to make that happen. Because every time, I've applied for grants in this area, I have a really low success rate. It's really hard to generate that excitement and enthusiasm for what's happening in the school library space. But what is so frustrating to me is that you've got these two compelling kinds of rhetorics kind of going on. We've got on one hand, oh no, the students need to be future ready. We need to get these, amazing skills so that they're, ready and robust to deal with what they're currently encountering, but also what they will encounter in the future. But at the same time, we're not looking around and thinking, who are the parties and, what are the resources that will make that happen? Oh, I know, school library professionals will be pivotal. What do we need to do, to meet their current and future needs? So yes, I'm hoping not to get fatigued. I'm hoping that at the moment I'm hitting a lot of kind of roadblocks, but I'm going to keep trying to a certain point, to make this happen, because it's something I really, really want to do. Get that lens on this, draw attention to the issues, make sure, using powerful research communication, get media interest in, sustaining the resource. I've done that in Australia. I've spoken with the national broadcasters. I've, gone on television and things like that, talking about the importance of school libraries. But, we need to do the research to generate the broader interest, because I know, leaders are going to be influenced by what the media says, perhaps more than what the research says in some cases, not all leaders, but some. So we need to be thinking about, when it comes to advocacy, you need to have that research foundation to then feed in to the knowledge mobilization that will then influence leadership decisions around whether or not they're going to give you additional staff members, whether or not they're going to, invest that money in those additional resources. So yes, I really want to build that robust international research program. Don't know if we'll succeed, so wish me luck.
And you know what? I'll tell you what, there's a listening audience right now who is absolutely inspired with all that you've had to share with us today. I hope that there are people listening right now who feel so motivated and look into the research that you're doing. Dr. Merga, I wish you the very best as you move forward, and thank you so much. You've been an absolute inspiration.
Many thanks, Amy. Thanks again for your ongoing interest in my work. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
You too.
Friends, it is always special when you book a conversation with somebody halfway around the world, and Dr. Merga is no exception. I am so grateful for the time and the passion with which she shared with us so generously today. And especially if you are interested, consider purchasing her book. I'll include a link in the show notes. I love reading Dr. Merga's work, and I stand by the recommendation which I put in the front cover of her book, which we based our conversation on today. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. A couple friendly reminders, friends. Use the code UNITED to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more. And librarians who book their very first Literati Book Fair and mention the code UNITED when booking may qualify to receive a $500 gift card to Titlewave. Visit the link in today's show notes and call the Literati team to see if you qualify. I hope you will consider sending in your voice message and have your say on the very next podcast episode. Visit the link in today's show notes. Join our next book club episode where we read Jarred Amato's brand new book, Just Read It. See the link in today's show notes, and be on the lookout for the questions which I will post in the middle of April. The topic of our next episode will be complete copyright and my conversation with Carrie Russell. I hope you will tune in.